105.5 WDHA here on the Jersey Magazine. I'm Jim Monahan, and you recognize, I'm sure, these two fine ladies who are with me this morning as we celebrate Women's History Month. Terrie Carr, Emma Spags, good morning and welcome.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, thanks for having us.
We were talking before we came on. None of us realized that this is the 40th anniversary of Women's History Month, which was started to celebrate the contributions that women have made to the United States and recognize specific achievements women have made over the course of American history. So I thought, well, let's stay right at home here at WDHA. Terrie Carr, as I'm sure you know, is our midday host and our program director. And Emma, I love this title, the Assistant Creative Services Director. And Emma is also a member of our weekend air staff, and you hear her all the time on commercials and what have you. So Terrie, let me start with you. Why radio is a career?
I've asked myself that many times. When I was a kid, it was just my first love. There was something magical about the radio, and there was a sense of mystery about it. And there was just something I loved about every aspect of it. The music, the personalities that came into your room and into your life. And I remember the first time that I heard somebody doing an actual air shift, as we call them. And it wasn't a woman who was doing news or doing weather or kind of a funky sidekick. And that was Alison Steele, the Nightbird. And I remember just, she was ringing the chimes and me being a young girl and thinking, wow. And she was playing all these cool, crazy songs from Moody Blues and bands I never heard before. And it was very heady. And I remember my cousin at a family barbecue saying, oh, well, she's the greatest. Don't you know Jimi Hendrix writes songs about her? And I thought, well, wow, that's a world I want to be a part of. If you could play music, ring the wind chimes, and have Jimi Hendrix writing songs about you. That's the you-know-what. So radio for me was just something that as a child I connected with. There was a magic to me about being in my dad's car and hearing Harry Harrison and cousin Brucey on, WABC on AM radio and wondering, where were these people? What is this mysterious world that these people are in? Seeing Wolfman Jack on the midnight special, they had this mystery about them. And I wanted to be a part of it, but we as ladies did not have that many role models. So that moment with Alison Steele for me, also I have to give props to a lady named Carol Ford, who was on a lot of R&B stations. We were a big R&B family in my family, and listening to Carol Ford and, to think about it now, what a groundbreaker she was, being an African-American woman and being able to break ground on R&B radio stations. She was also somebody that I really, really looked to. And then, of course, later came Carol Miller. But before I really understood what it was all about, I knew I wanted to be part of an industry that I had no idea how to get into, but I was certainly willing to give it a college try.
Emma, let me ask you the same question. Why radio?
Similarly to Terrie, actually, when I was a kid, it was just something every morning when I was in middle school. I used to wake up extra early before school just to catch all of my favorite morning radio shows. I always really loved morning shows that were really chaotic and funny. And maybe that's why I really love producing morning show segments like Fuzzy Fractured Fairy Tales.
You've come to the right place.
But yeah, so ever since I was a kid, I knew that it was an industry that I wanted to get into, and I've just sort of gone about it ever since.
Terrie, you had mentioned Alison Steele, and this is a male-dominated industry, radio, and it has been for quite some time.
Still is.
Yeah, it still is. Kind of as a footnote, that station that she was on for a brief period of time, what they did was they had an all-female format. And if you remember those game shows in the 60s, Peggy Cass was on, I think, every game show on television ever. And Peggy was one of the jocks on the station. There was a woman named Nell Bassett, who I ended up working with. She went into the front office. And then there was, of course, Allison. And Allison was the only one who made the journey forward when the station went from that all-female, like a middle-of-the-road type thing to rock. So, Emma, who was it? Like, is there one specific woman that influenced you? And obviously, Terrie, I know that she's kind of taken you under her wing, but is there somebody else that, growing up listening to, as I throw my pen across the computer here, and I'm not the one drinking, by the way, Terrie and Emma are.
I've taken her under my wing, that's for sure.
It may be early Sunday morning as this interview is airing, but it is Sunday afternoon right now. So
Sunday
at any
brunch.
rate, Emma, continue, please.
Yeah, I mean, I actually grew up listening to DHA. So Terrie was somebody that I always listened to, as well as Carol Miller. I also loved Angie Martinez on like the sort of hip hop side. So there's so many women that I've looked up to, over the years in radio, but definitely Terrie. I mean, it's been amazing being at DHA and learning with Terrie because she's someone that has really paved the way for so many women in, radio. So
Terrie, I've worked for women in administrative roles before in radio, but you're the first female program director I've worked for. How difficult is it for a woman to be a program director?
It's difficult to become one, but then once you're there, it's up to you. It has nothing to do. You can never complain about, oh, it's so difficult to be here. It's up to you to gain the trust and the respect of your staff. But getting your foot in that door, especially in rock radio, is not really easy because rock radio, I don't want to say hasn't always been kind, but it's a very male-dominated business. So I remember knocking on doors early in my career. I knocked on DHA's door early in my career, and they kind of sent me packing as a young woman, maybe Emma's age or a little bit younger, saying, we already have a quota of how many females that we have on the air right now. We like you. They were encouraging. But come back in a couple of years because that quota may go down and maybe we'll be able to use you. And, we accepted that as women because that's the way it was. You can complain, people can complain about it, but sometimes things are the way they are. And you just always figure that if you get your chance to get your foot in the door, that's the way. So becoming the program director was interesting, not always easy at the time, because a lot of the times you're making executive decisions, working with record company executives who've been mostly used to working with men, artists who've been mostly used to working with men, in a male-dominated industry, mostly working with men. So you've really got to figure out where you fit. And I think coming in and assessing the situation as best you can in the beginning is probably step number one. And, my thing was always just about being part of my staff. That's really all I care about. All the other stuff is stuff that I can put to the side. Gaining the respect of my staff and making sure that we have a healthy, working, motivated staff is the most important thing. And then you can kind of look back and be like, wow, there's not really that many women. I did a Zoom with Amy Lee from Evanescence, and she talked about how her father was a radio guy in Arkansas or something. And she said to me, wow, you're the program director of a rock station. I know how difficult it was for my dad at times. I can't even imagine being a woman trying to break through that. And at the time I was breaking through that, I really didn't realize it. Looking back now, I see some of the challenges. There were a lot of tests. I had a lot of men that would call me and, make demands on, you got to get this done, got to get that done, got to get this done. And, there were a lot of tests. I felt that I had to work twice as hard for half the reward, but I was more than willing to do that because for me, it was a mission that I wanted to take on. And I think if you want to take something on, you've got to go with the risk, the reward, and the BS that comes along with that mission. Otherwise, you don't get yourself in the game.
So, Emma, you're relatively young in terms of your radio career. How difficult or easy was it for you to get your foot in the door? Some doors have already been opened for women in radio. What was it like for you?
I would say pretty similar. Even going throughout my college radio experience, it was mostly men around me, but I became the general manager of my college station 2 years in and pretty much led a staff of all men. And it was definitely hard to, like Terrie said, gain respect at first. But I also felt like I had to work twice as hard, but it's been so rewarding. So, and then, at DHA as well, there I haven't really experienced as much as Terrie obviously did when she was younger, because people like Terrie have paved this path for, women like younger like me. So I haven't experienced it at DHA as much, but definitely earlier on, that was something that you really have to, accept. And
the similarity between me and Emma, not to cut you off, Emma, but I think we both have very strong constitutions. And I also think that comes from having very close family ties. My family was very supportive of me getting in the industry. Especially my dad, who was always a big, big supporter of mine. And I think when you have that, you have a confidence about you because somebody is always telling you to follow your dreams. You're strong, you're tough, you can make this happen. Look how far you've come. I was approached by a men's magazine once. I won't say which one, but they'd asked me if I wanted to pose. They were doing some kind of radio women or something. So I remember running it by my dad, saying, wow, I just started being a program director. And I said, I could have a nice picture taken or whatever. My dad said to me, I support everything you do, but you always tell me how hard it is for you. Is this going to be something that's going to help you or going to hurt you? So think about it before you make a decision like that. And I thought to myself, yeah, it's probably not the decision that I've been fighting this fight for. So having a really supportive family, I think, I don't want to underestimate that. And I see Emma, Emma, I know how strong her family ties are. Her parents are listeners. I remember meeting your mom at the blood drive, Emma, and having her tell me how much you loved working at the station. So I think when you come from that kind of a background, her mom called me for a Shinedown request like 3 weeks ago. Yeah. So when you have that in your background also, it certainly helps you be able to facilitate your dreams because you feel empowered even at times when you may not be.
It's Women's History Month that we're celebrating here at 105.5 WDHA on the Jersey Magazine. And I have Terrie and Emma from WDHA with me this morning. And we're talking about some of the roles of women in radio. And I think one of the things that helps at DHA is our sales staff has some very strong female presence in it. Val, Ellen, Marianne, we have a strong female selling background. And some of our listeners will know those names because they've met them at events. But how much does that, and again, this is kind of behind the scenes, not necessarily what our listeners hear in terms of the jocks and the music, but how big of a factor is that? And you both work with them in one way, shape, or form. Emma, let me start with you because you put a lot of those commercials together and you're dealing with, shall I say, unique requests sometimes.
Definitely. I love working with them. It's really great to have such a strong female presence just in the building, and I've loved working with our sales staff. So.
Terrie, the same question, because you as the program director deal with them on a on a very different level.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's been wonderful because we have very strong personalities that have a vision for their clients and their advertisers with the radio station and the understanding of the radio station. And the beauty of it all is I think that our females are so passionate about WDHA that I don't really think of it sometimes as male or female. I just think of their passion for the radio station. And we're really lucky that the females that we have that work in our building are so passionate about the station brand. And most of them have been there for a really long time. I don't think we have anybody who's been there for under 12 or 13 years. I think Mare is probably, and Ash are probably,
Ashley,
are
yes.
two. Valerie and Ellen have been there. I mean, Ellen's, been there for 30 years. So she's been through every phase of WDHA. Ellen and I started almost at the same time together as these two, young whippersnappers, so we've been through every current of the station, but yeah, they're super passionate about the brand. And I think it's very empowering to be able to work with women that are so incredibly strong. And they are, I mean, they have their vision for what they would like to bring to the table as it affects their job. And it's empowering definitely for me and Emma.
You mentioned Ashley. Her nickname around the station is Smashley. We have a good time with her. You can always tell when she's in the building because her infectious laugh. And she, much like Emma, grew up listening to the radio station. So
Yes.
in some sense, it's like coming home, I guess, to the place that you're very comfortable with. And it is a very, very dynamic. I tease Ed Silver, our sales manager, all the time about working with them, but it's a very dynamic and very eclectic group, and they do an amazing job. What they've done through COVID has been nothing short of astounding.
No
When you
question.
consider
No
what
question.
has happened throughout the industry. Speaking of COVID, Terrie, what was the biggest effect, aside from the lockdown, that you had to deal with as program director?
I think making sure that our listeners still felt a connection with us and a connection with our artists. Our artists were not out touring. They were not coming to the radio station. We were not doing listener sessions. We were not at the Raven Room. And yet we still play, especially for the current based rockers, great amount of current based music. I'm wearing my plush shirt, supporting the next generation of women, because I always say to people, otherwise I'm the Energizer Bunny. I just keep hitting the wall playing the same 5 bands over and over. And that's not what people come to WDHA for. So I think we did series like Reconnect with Rockers and trying to do as many interviews as we can to still have these artists who were fighting through COVID themselves and putting out records and trying to stay relevant and making sure that we still had that connection. I mean, that was probably my biggest challenge in getting with our music community and saying, what can we, as your radio partners, do for you to keep you in a top of mind awareness bracket with our listeners who we know love you, whether it was virtual happy hours or Reconnect with Rockers or bands, booze and bandwidth or whatever we could do. Radio is a participation sport. It's not an isolation sport. It's a participation sport. We want to be out there. We want to be talking to people. We want to be taking selfies with people. I want to be helping you get your animals, adopted. So to have everybody then be so separate was definitely not something that we're used to. We're the community radio station. People will stop by and say, TC, I have this extra, 15-pound bag of dog food. Can I drop it off here and get a selfie? Can I pose by the DHA Christmas tree? Can I see if Chris Daughtry will take a picture with me in the parking lot? Can we come in and watch a band play live? Having all of that be shut down was a huge challenge. And we tried to do whatever we could to bring that back to people.
Emma, how did it affect you?
For me, it was really tough because I was furloughed in March of 2020. And I believe I came back in either September or October, as I was also board opping on our sister station, WMTR, doing Penn State football games and that sort of thing. So it was about 6 months or so where I wasn't physically at DHA, but because DHA just feels like home to me, I was always, connected with Terrie's Reconnect with Rockers series or just different ways that, during COVID to sort of keep positive and to go back to the thing that I love, which is radio and rock music. It was always nice to be able to turn to outlets like, Reconnect with Rockers, or even just listening to the station live in general. So that was a really difficult time for me, but I'm happy to be back now.
Women's History Month, we're celebrating it all month long here on the Jersey Magazine at 105.5 WDHA. We were talking, Terrie, Emma, and I, before we came on the air this morning. And one of the things we were talking about was women artists. And, this is all, there have always been female singers and bands and what have you. You go back to the 60s and, Connie Francis, Leslie Gore, Motown. And you can name artist after artist. You mentioned Susie Quattro a little earlier, Joan Jett, The Runaways, Bonnie Raitt, Chrissie Hynde, The Pretenders, girl groups like the Bangles and the Go-Go's, Lita Ford, Hart, Ann and Nancy Wilson. At times, it always seemed like, and I don't remember whether the Go-Go's or the Bangles came first. I don't remember which one, but
Go-Go's.
A girl group. We'll get our version of it.
Yep.
Thus the Bangles. What's happening now, though, and I was going through this list: Dorothy Martin, Lizzie Hale, Nita Strauss, Plush, the shirt that you're wearing, Lilith Czar, Zuzu from Soraya, Taylor Momsen, and I could go on and on. This seems to be more than a record company guy saying, oh, we'll get our version of. What's happening from your end, Terrie? What are you seeing?
I am seeing, as I mentioned to Lizzie Hale on a Reconnect with Rockers 2 weeks ago, I really hold her responsible, I think, for, as I said to her, you've provided kind of a little bit of an escalator as women always moved up the hill slowly. I look at the women of the 90s and I think, what a freaking raw deal they got. There were so many cool bands that came out in the 90s. Bands like The Breeders and Veruca Salt and Bikini Kill. These artists would go out at festival shows. And I have to give a hats off to the male rockers in the 90s. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden. They took a lot of these women out on tour with them. People would throw stuff at the bands and stuff. It was such an amount of disrespect. I never saw anything like it before. And I think these women all got left behind. I look at an artist like Alanis Morissette, who sold like just almost like hundreds of millions of records back in the 90s. And then people would say, well, where do we put her now? What do you mean, where do you put her now? I think there was a period of time where like 1 in every 200 households had a copy of Jagged Little Pill. These women changed the whole trajectory and never really got the credit that they deserve. So, somebody like a Susie Quattro too, you know, who was big in Europe because we had Joan Jett here and we just didn't have room for 2 people.
No, couldn't do that.
Just crazy. I mean, crazy. When did we not have room for 2 Jimmy Pages? We're looking for 2 Jimmy Pages. For God's sakes, we had 1 Bon Jovi, and for the next 10 years, we had 100 Bon Jovis.
Right.
But for women, it has not been like that. Now, I credit somebody like a Lizzie Hale, because Lizzie, when the first record came out, 2009-ish, I don't know if I may be wrong by a year or something. Anyway, all of a sudden the band started getting #1s at rock radio, filling up arenas. Now they can do arena tours. They've really helped. Hailstorm has the plight of female bands, Evanescence as well, because Amy Lee's always been a ticket seller. Amy Lee talked also about how on Bring Me Back to Life, they still had to get a male voice in there because people were saying, well, rock radio is not going to play you if it's just you. You've got to have kind of a duet with another guy. So I think Amy and Lizzie have been unsung heroes of this whole revolution. Now, sonically, we have all these artists that don't necessarily sound the same. Taylor Momsen doesn't sound like Lilith Czar. Nita Strauss is an instrumentalist who has had a #1 at rock radio with Dead Inside, bringing in her friend David Draymond, of course, but it's still her album. A lot of these bands, Zuzu from Soraya, who's making some headway and certainly being a great independent artist on this cool little Steven label. She doesn't sound like any of those artists. So the cool thing is we've got people who sonically now don't have to sound the same. And we're also not getting that mandate at rock radio, which I never paid attention to, oh, we already have 2 women on the playlist. We can't have another one because we already have so many. That has fallen by the wayside because right now you cannot ignore all of the women that are making noise on the rock radio charts.
Yeah, Emma, you're
a huge, huge, huge door that we've pushed through.
not to make it seem like you're, a child here, but you are at the, the opening stages of your radio career. And we've never had this at DHA, but I've worked under program directors that you can't play female artists back to back.
Mhm.
Can't do it. What do you mean I can't? Why? I never, ever understood that. And to look at this list of women, Dorothy Martin's the one that stands out for me, Terry. That
Mondo
voice,
talent, mega talent, rock and roll Adele, mega
Yes.
talent.
Amazing. That is a generation voice right there. Like think Chris Cornell, that type of voice. That is the voice of a generation. I think that she's going to have a huge career.
And I remember the first time I saw her. And nobody was playing her at rock radio. And I saw her at Webster Hall opening up for Hailstorm and Lita Ford. And I said, who is this girl? And I called my record company person whose label she was on at the time, who was working me on like 5 different male dominated records. Nothing against that, of course. And I said, this woman is a rock star. And you've never mentioned that she's on the label that you, oh, yeah. No, she's good. She's good. Good. I'm putting her in rotation tomorrow. And I remember a couple of people were saying, well, who is she? Why are you playing her? Nobody else is playing her. I don't give a crap what anybody else is doing. She stole that Webster Hall show. She was an absolute total rock star. And I think people have to be willing to to jump in there and say that about people that you really believe, the talented people shouldn't fall by the wayside because of their gender.
As we wrap up this interview here, normally I tell people, oh, for more information, go to, and I give out a website. Well, we don't have to do that because you're already here at WDHAFM.com. One of the things that makes WDHA so special, and Terrie, I'll ask you this, is something right now, radio is so niche. You play this, you play that. There's just this, genre of music. We're playing music at DHA that covers 7 decades of rock from the 60s to the 2020s. How in heaven's name are you pulling that off?
I don't know how we're pulling it off. I just don't know. You know what? I have to thank the listeners, because the listeners let us know that they want to hear that they still want to hear a beautiful Jimi Hendrix song, and that they also want to hear a Dorothy song. DHA is a very special radio station. And that's why it's so important to all of us. And I don't know if sometimes people realize that, people will move away and then they'll say, we don't have a station like DHA here. And that's the beauty of the station. And I think that it's more them than us, because it's always, everything that's a success is supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
So our listeners really help to drive that train for us. We're lucky to have people of Emma's age group, and then Jim of your age group and my age group, fueling that and driving that train. So I have to thank our WDHA listeners for, 90% of that.
And you mentioned people moving away. Emma is a frequent visitor to our live sessions on Facebook on the Morning Jolt, Monday through Friday morning. And Emma, I'm sure by now you've noticed the number of listeners who are not in New Jersey who are coming in. Joe is in one of the Carolinas, and there's other listeners as well. We have Don occasionally checking in from Florida. They're all listening on the app. They all want to still feel like they're a part of New Jersey. So you see that every day.
Absolutely. And it's Terrie is totally right. There's no station like DHA. Even for me, I went to college in New England. I would still listen to DHA on the stream, because I've never found a radio station that's as tied to the community as DHA is, that has the same sort of amazing playlist that DHA has. So it's really a special station.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on with us, Terrie Carr and Emma, of course. Emma, we're going to be working for you someday. You were general manager at your college station. We're going to be working for you someday. You mark my words.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. And I'll see you Monday in the office.
See you guys. Love you guys. Thanks for having us, Jim.
For having us, Jim.